Kia ora e te iwi and welcome to The Chew.
The Chew.
Where we chew the fat off random kaupapa. Anei ahau ko taika māwako kori.
Kia ora.
Coming at you from the official The Chew studio here in Corey's whare.
The Chew.
And today, whānau, we're going to be hitting it pretty hard with a pretty thick and heavy kaupapa today, which is conscious and unconscious bias.
Ooh, yeah, scary.
Ooh, so we could get a little bit rocky and rough there at whānau.
Mm-hmm.
So, conscious and unconscious bias here, Hika. Yeah. What have you got? What have you got for us?
Well, I think let's start with something really obvious, and it's probably something a little close to both of us, bro, which is the mispronunciation of Māori words, and specifically the mispronunciation of place names. Yeah. So we're going to start at a conscious bias position, because what we're going to talk about is how we feel about people who willfully mispronounce Māori words. Mm-hmm. And what may be the driver for that? I mean, for starters, what are some examples that you come across, bro?
Oh, quite a few probably in the previous 10 or 15 years being down here in the Tahuna region. It was very, very common for a lot of, mispronunciation down here, especially in that sort of business environment.
Yep.
Growing up as a Māori boy, knowing te reo, knowing the proper pronunciation of those vowels, those words, and hearing a lot of, mentors and people that I look up to in the business or professional world mispronouncing them.
Yep.
And knowing that they were doing that, and wanting to fit in, be a part of the crew in that professional world, it'd make me feel really uncomfortable to pronounce, the kawarau correctly, all these other names, rotorua, as it should be pronounced.
Let's grab that first one you said, bro. So how is that one normally mispronounced?
Oh, kawara. Kawarau.
Yeah, kawarau. Yeah, there's quite a lot there. And, when we say conscious bias, what we really mean is people who knowingly mispronounce. So there's no venom directed at people who just don't know or didn't know what the proper names were. So some people who just always thought kawara or kawarau was correct. It's fine. I understand that you might not have ever been corrected, but The thing that disappoints me is the amount of people that once corrected, they still willfully decide to mispronounce.
Yeah, continue along that mispronunciation.
With all manner of really bad excuses like, it's always been like that. No, it hasn't always been like that. It's been the correct way up until a point where mispronunciations came in. And for me, that name kawarau, it has a lot of mana.
Yeah.
Because it's the name of the maunga here, the Remarkables. And so and there's a big story of the whakapapa of that name and that person, kawarau. So it's disappointing when people willfully mispronounce that. Yeah.
And some really good examples too, especially down here in Te Waipounamu. You look at the name Waihola. Kurel, those place names have stories, whakapapa, history, that created those original names like Waihora, or Kohuro, and then that mispronunciation has just evolved into these names that we know them today, such as Waihola and Kurel.
A good thing that you can do, whānau, if you're interested in finding out the real stories for these names and the correct pronunciation, I would recommend following Ngā Manu. It's the Ngāi Tahu Atlas for the local for the correct names of the Waipounamu, and a lot of research has gone into those correct names, and as they become corrected and as they become known, that webpage, the Atlas for Ngāi Tahu names, will be updated with all of that. So I use it as one of my main resources for for the names, for the Māori names in this region, in the Waipounamu. And I'm constantly being corrected myself. Just when I thought I knew what the correct place name was, I would refer to the Atlas and find out that there were changes made, or there's a different story to it. So, yeah, we would like to encourage all our listeners out there to do your best at correct pronunciation of Māori words, and try not to be in what I like to say the minority of people who willfully mispronounce. Yeah. Do you have any other example place names in this region, Ehika?
Well, we had a conversation earlier, and we actually didn't know whether it was a te reo Māori name or not, which was Moke Lake or Lake Moke.
I still don't know, bro. I have no idea. Yeah.
Yeah, so if there's any whānau out there that know the whakapapa of that ingoa, and if it is a Māori name, then, hey, there's been lots of mispronunciation of Moke Lake. If it is a te reo name, Lake Moke.
Yeah.
So that's another example. What about yourself? You got any that you know?
This is a simple one, eh? It's Wanaka. So I would talk to people back then and say, I went for a drive out to Wanaka, and they'd look at me funny and go, oh, you mean Wanaka? I'm like, no, I mean Wanaka. So it's such a simple, a subtle difference, and yet it's enough for other people to go, oh, you said it wrong. I'm like, actually, you're the one that said it wrong. But, I'm not so headstrong about people's mispronunciations these days. I find that in my time, and you've probably had this too, bro, in my time, you meet so many people who willfully mispronounce that you realise it's a futile effort to try and educate them.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what I realised is you really only want to have those conversations with people who are open to it. And if they're not, you best just turn and walk away, because you'll just be you'll be at loggerheads with each other. Yeah.
And the first step is appropriate pronunciation yourself, and I was definitely guilty of that. Trying to fit in everywhere. When I moved away from Taranaki up to the Bay of Plenty or Te Arawa country or Rotorua, because everyone was saying Rotorua, it only felt right to fit in and say Rotorua as well rather than Rotorua.
Yep.
And then,
I've done that too, bro.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Even down here, being around a lot of my European or Pākehā friends that were saying all these other names, Tauranga, Tauranga. Yeah, and a funny story about that, when I was young, one of the new students come to our school and said, oh, I'm from Tauranga. And I was like, oh, is that in Australia? Because they got a zoo over there.
Oh, yeah, true.
Yeah. And
Taronga Zoo.
Yeah, and he goes, nah, up by the mount. And I was like, hey, where's that place? And he goes, oh, it's a pretty big city. And he told us, and I was like, oh, Tauranga. And my other Māori mate was like, oh, yeah, he's talking about Tauranga. But we thought it was a totally different area. We thought it was, Taronga Zoo. Apologies if I've mispronounced that name too. Yeah, Taronga. And that was really the first time I'd realised the mispronunciation, because that was at primary school, I think.
Wow. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, so you were dead serious at the time.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's probably, like I said, the first time that would really heard that incorrect pronunciation, but my mate not necessarily knowing it was incorrect. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, there's just so many out there, eh? Any that really strike you as particularly bad?
That's probably the worst of it, probably Tauranga.
I've got a couple. Te Kawara. Yeah. So Te Kawara was one that I came across when I used to...
Te Kawara.
Yeah, I know. It's hard to figure out what that one is supposed to be. Te Kawara. So it's a place up in sort of north of Hamilton. Yep. So the proper Māori name is Te Kauwhata. Te kouwhata, bro. So, yeah.
Te kouwhata.
Te kouwhata.
Te kawara.
Yeah, te kawara. Te kawara.
Oh.
Te kawara. Yeah.
Oh, we.
And the worst part for me was the first time I heard that the name of that place name was from a Māori guy who I worked with in Auckland, and he was trying to tell me where this bar that I had to go to do a fix. So yeah, he goes, "Oh, go to Te Kawara," and I'm like, "Te Kawara, where's that?" And again, it's the same thing. I knew it was a mispronunciation. It's just I'm sitting there going, "What the hell was that mispronunciation of?"
Where's that place? Is that another Aussie name?
So I actually ended up asking him, "Oh, where is it, bro? Like, can you show me on a map where it is?" And he had to show me on a map, and I didn't have the heart to correct him or say anything, but yeah, I just like his mana dropped severely after that. So yeah, the other one which I kind of I think is particularly bad is Wakawai.
Wakawai.
Yeah, Wakawai. People from over Dunedin may be familiar with this one. So Waikawaiti.
Oh,
yeah. Yeah, or Wakawai.
Beautiful beach actually over there.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, it is, yeah, that inlet. Yeah, it's real nice over there. Real nice place. Yeah. But yeah, I remember that one surprising me when I heard it. So, there are some rules that apply to mispronunciation.
Yeah.
So the AU is mispronounced as ow. So you got tau ronga, you've got tau po, you've got all of those. So the AU for me is the most
Cow copper copper.
Yeah, cow, all the cows, oma cow or oma cow. So yeah, and so how do you approach correcting people, bro? Do you do it, or do you just leave it alone?
Most of the time I just leave it alone, but then I'll do it subtly by doing the correct pronunciation. Especially if I know they know.
Yeah.
Yeah, because, living down here in Tahuna, we have a lot of foreigners, from overseas, a lot of English, a lot of South American, whānau down here. So it's really hard to tell whether they know or they don't know. So, yeah, like I said, I just do it really subtly by saying, the Kawarau Gorge, I travel through the Kawarau Gorge and, that's the Maunga as well. And if they don't know, like a lot of our foreign friends, then they'll be like, "Oh, is that how you pronounce it?" And then, so, yeah. What about yourself?
No, I definitely don't.
Yeah.
I used to, but I don't anymore. So unless I know who they are personally, and I know that they are on a journey of learning te reo, and that's Māori, Pākehā, Tauiwi. So if any of my any of the people I've met through Te Ara Reo Māori, if I see really bad pronunciation of something, I'll correct them, and with a smile and a laugh. There's one thing I don't like to do is to whakaiti people or to put them down and make them feel ashamed. So I'll whatever corrections I'll do, I'll be trying to do it from a place of understanding and love, I suppose. So it's not to be critical, it's just to try and correct.
And it's probably more so common down here in the in the South Island or Southland region, because a lot of the place names here are in English, to be honest, or they've been mispronounced, that they've evolved into a mishmash of English and te reo and probably another language altogether. So in the North Island, there's a lot more prominent te reo Māori names. And a Scottish friend of mine, she actually said that. She goes, I found it easy to pronounce the names down here, like in Invercargill, Dunedin, because they have that Scottish influence. But she goes, when I went on holiday up north, it was just horrendous. Yeah. So I'm not saying that's the reason it's not as great down in this area, but it is refreshing going back up home, and especially, you get into Wellington Airport and the taxi driver or the bus driver picks you up, and, he's pronouncing all the names correctly, you know. Oh, I grew up in Te Teko, and you know, my family are from Kawakawa, you know, and saying it all correctly, and like, oh, it's refreshing just hearing that come through naturally.
Yep. So I remember a few years back, a Māori friend of mine, and you know, he was, I wouldn't call him fluent, but he had better te reo than I did at the time. But there's one thing he said to me was, he goes, you know, bro, I'm from Otara, and he said, for some reason, Otara to me will always be Otara, and I'm like, so you don't say Otara? He's like, nah. He goes, for some reason that place, because I grew up there and my whole life was there, that's the one that I really struggle to say it right, and so he's reconciled that he's okay with labelling that place Otara, and I thought that was, you know, that's a bit funny, but then at the same time, I spent a lot of years schooling in Wairoa, and again, I'm the same. I have real trouble saying Wairoa. Now, I force myself to, but if there's one place that I struggle to say the correct place name for, it's Wairoa in Hawke's Bay. So I did a lot of schooling there, went to a few primary schools in the region, went to Wairoa Intermediate for a couple of years before I went to Gizzy Boys High. So
it's an embedded, habitual way of doing it. It's just fully embedded in you.
Fully.
Yeah. And I've got a similar one with a place called Waitotara.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, which is called Waitotra. You know, it's not called that, but it's, that's how the locals pronounce it.
Yeah, of course.
But same,
of course.
Yeah, I always say Waitotra.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, so we fall into the trap too, whānau. You know, and some of our Māori, like from that story, even our Māori are making choices to do willful mispronunciation. So, you know, it's an interesting discussion. It's full of nuance. It's not as black and white as it seems.
And we're all guilty of it, like you just said. All guilty of it.
Yeah. Especially those of us, like me and the bro, who were probably brought up in a time where mispronunciation was not just acceptable, but probably more than norm.
Yeah, normalised.
Yeah. So, you know, I'm doing my best to retune myself to correct pronunciation. We're lucky enough to have so many young Māori come through who correctly pronounce everything. Yeah. So,
and they're just reminders too when they come down to the region, right, for a holiday or a harare, and then, you know, they do come along and just say, oh yeah, I'm from Rotorua, you know, and you're like, oh yes, you know, and it's just another reminder, right, you know, you just got to try a little bit harder and keep going. Yeah.
And what I love about my time down here in the Waipounamu is I've found that a lot of people that I'll talk to, especially in Māori circles, you know, with things like some of the wānanga reo that I attend, Maurako wānanga that I go to, I notice that a lot of people from Christchurch refer to where they come from as o Tautahi. They don't even say Christchurch or Tautahi.
Chair that one I know over there.
Yeah, and the ones in Dunedin, they'll say Otipoti as well. So, you know, Murihiku, you hear Murihiku a lot.
Yep.
Where are you from? Oh, Murihiku.
Yep.
They don't even say Invercargill. Yeah. So, it's, I've noticed that they're replacing the common English place names with all the Māori ones now. Yeah, Tahuna is an example. You know, Queenstown, which I've sort of since found out was Tahuna is not actually the name for Queenstown. It was apparently it was a mapping error, and Tahuna was the name for Glenorchy. But on a map, someone accidentally placed it here, so they named this area Tahuna. Now that's just the latest story that I heard. I'm not sure exactly if it's 100% exactly. If anyone knows if that's wrong, put a comment whānau.
Let us know.
Yeah, let us know.
Yeah.
So now moving on from
place names.
Place names and willful mispronunciation of Māori words. We're going to sort of delve into a different area, bro, which might get a little bit heavy.
Ooh,
Yeah.
we're going to open that heavy kuaha, open
Yeah,
that heavy door,
let's- yeah.
have a peek in there.
Yep.
Yep.
Yep. Whakatipu te tatou taumaha, eh?
Yee.
So, going to open the heavy door.
Aye.
Yeah. So, in your lifetime, bro, I'm going to assume, because you're Māori and you're brought up in New Zealand, that you experienced a lot of conscious and unconscious bias.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely. Obviously, I was sort of raised probably in a slightly later generation than you.
Yep.
So I wasn't subject to a lot of in-your-face, real hard-hitting racism that a lot of my whanaunga or, whānau face, probably even yourself too. But yeah, probably a lot of unconscious bias, I suppose.
Yeah.
A lot like with the place names.
Yep.
Even, with mahi.
Yep.
Like I said, obviously we are in some sort of semi-professional jobs,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
people
yeah.
classify us
Yeah.
as. You working in IT and, me working in the HR space for many, many years and recently health and safety is, when I was introducing myself to people and, telling them who I work for. Look, I work for Skyline Enterprises. I'd assume that they would almost think that I'd work on the grounds or in the engineering department, because it always came to a shock to them that I sort of worked in the HR department when I said, I work in the human resources department.
Yeah.
And then immediately you'd see the shock on their face with oh, really?
Yeah.
Even a couple of times where, I say, I work for Skyline, and they'd immediately just come out and say, do you work in the kitchen, or, do you work on the grounds? And I'm like, no, I work in administration and HR. And they're like, oh, far out.
Yeah.
So, I'm making a bit of an assumption here is, people seeing, our brown brother working for a pretty prominent business and then, figuring that potentially I'd work in the kitchen or in the grounds and, not be in those professional spaces where
Yep.
a lot of Māori people probably were in.
Yeah. And so, that's classic stereotyping, right?
Yep.
That we're in low income work.
Mm-hmm.
And I experienced that a lot myself. Of course, people would assume that I was a barman or something, and well, to be honest, I spent a bit of time as a barman.
Me too.
and our family owned a pub too, so it was like, yeah, okay, you're kind of right, but stop stereotyping me, would you?
Before I tell you what I actually do.
And I'll say, no, I saw a photo of you serving beer behind a bar, and I'm like, oh, okay, sorry. Yeah, no, I got that quite a bit, and all through my life, after high school, I ended up in the Air Force for a bit, and so this unconscious bias is a bit of a funnier story because this is Māori's unconscious bias. And so when I was young and I went into the Air Force, Māori in the Air Force wasn't common, right? So especially on the East Coast, most of the Māori went into the Army. And then not long after that, a lot of East Coast went into the Navy. So Army and Navy is kind of the place where you hear a lot of Māori going. So my own family, no matter how many times I told them I was in the Air Force, I had one of my aunties, sorry auntie, I'm not going to name you. Every time I go to visit, this was the funniest thing. I went and visited my uncle and my auntie, and I was having a cup of tea, and my auntie said to me, "Oh, so what's the army like, boy? You enjoying it?" and my uncle piped in and goes, "Oh, Mum, he's not in the army, he's in the Navy." And I'm like, oh, actually, I'm in the Air Force.
Oh, really, boy?
And of course, yep, you can guess what comes after that. It's the old, "Are you a pilot?"
Ko nen.
So yeah, I love my whānau, but that unconscious bias goes in both directions. You
Absolutely.
know? So yeah, that was always a funny conversation, and but even when I was in IT, I had the same problem. You know, people were always surprised that I worked in IT, and even when I worked in IT, people who knew the industry would say, "Oh, are you in the help desk or something?" You know, and you know, nothing against help desk, but it has this perception that that's sort of the least qualified people go there. So I'm like, no, I know what you're doing, though. Yeah, so no, I've experienced quite a bit of that. That unconscious bias, but I've also experienced a lot of just flat out racism. Yeah. And so, did you experience much racism either in the workplace or in real life, bro?
Yeah, not heavy, hard, conscious racism, to be honest. I've seen a lot of it.
Lucky.
Yeah, us Gen Ys, I think that's what I fall under, Gen Ys. Yeah, we probably missed a lot of that, to be honest, and I was always living or raised in areas probably where it wasn't as prominent. South Taranaki
Yeah.
area, you know, Rotorua, you know, Te Arawa country, and then obviously being down here in Queenstown and even Dunedin, you know, didn't really experience, probably nowhere near what you would have experienced. Yeah. So hit us some of those experiences. Hit us with some of those experiences.
Oh, well, the first one, and was a real shock to my system, and it was real early on in my life too. So it was when I finally finished high school, and I joined the Air Force, and the first place you go is a recruit course in Blenheim. So Blenheim, and you know, I was the happiest little Māori boy because I'd never been to the South Island before, never been on a plane before. You know, this was like a big adventure for me. But yeah, my time in Blenheim was a bit mixed. That was the first place I'd ever been called the N-word. So, and that wasn't even like a flippant remark. It was with venom.
Yeah, directed.
Yeah, directed at me with venom. Now, I'm not gonna taint that whole town with that. That's not what this is about. This was, you know, we were young, so we were. Well, I was about 18 at the time, so you know, and we would come across other 18-year-olds in town. They'd see the shaved head. They knew we were Air Force, and so they would, you know, locals would just wind us up for the sake of it. Calling a brown guy the N-word is an easy way of getting you fired up, and it worked. So yeah, got into a few little scuffles back in those early days. Yeah, again, just something simple, and it may not mean a lot to a lot of people, but it was quite a change for me to hear, and that's being called black. I had never been called black in Gisborne. No one, well, at least
Unless
back
it's your
in,
cousins.
Yeah. Yeah, back in my day, a non-Māori would never call a Māori black in Gisborne. It was just kind of, you know, it was more of an integrated society, and I guess some people knew how to approach Māori people a little bit better.
Yep.
But in the South Island, man, people would call me black, and they were people who I thought were friends. And I'd like to call that unconscious bias, because I don't think they had any malice behind calling me black. But yeah, and it wasn't that they called me just black. They would say, "Hey, Blackie, can you come over here and help?" You know, that kind of thing. And I just didn't take too kindly to that. So I got into a lot of skirmishes over that. And they'll say something like, "Oh, you're a funny black C." And I'm like, what did you just say? You know, and I would turn into a completely different person, because that whole racism thing is just not common for us growing up back in Gisborne. Yeah. You're probably the same, bro. So,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, when you're in a town that doesn't have a lot of Māori, and they just probably don't know how sensitive those kinds of words are to us. And me coming from a predominantly Māori area, it's not accepted to talk to us like that. And I'm not making I'm not trying to defend anybody here, but the Māori in those small towns probably put up with that kind of
behaviour.
Talk. And they ended up seeing it as normalised for them.
Yep.
Just because they were a vast minority and didn't really want to rock the boat. And I get that. But I had a chip on my shoulder back then and sort of, created problems. Same thing happened to me when I moved to Christchurch. Got called the N-word a few times down there as well. And just randomly from people, I was just walking on one side of the street one time. And, and a group of guys just started yelling at me and saying, dumb stuff like, go back to where you came from. Like, duh. I don't get that one, bro. Like, telling a Māori to go back where they came from when you're essentially, your ancestors migrated far more recently than ours. So, I copped a little bit, and only really in the South Island too. So I travelled to Auckland a lot, never had it there. Wellington, never had it there. It was really just when I got to the South Island. Nothing against the South Island, because I love this place. It's a different time now. So I'm talking about 1990 was when I made the first move straight after high school to Blenheim. So I was there in 1990. Now it's 2022. So we're talking 30 years ago. It's a different time and a different place. And I haven't experienced any kind of direct conscious racism at me in a long, long time. I can't remember the last time since I've been in the South Island. I'll have to clarify that by saying I have experienced a lot of unconscious bias, but not conscious bias.
Wow, far out. And very similar. A lot of unconscious bias, but definitely nothing like that in my experience. Like I said, those towns that I sort of grew up and lived in, real integrated societies. A lot of Māori people. Well, you look at Rotorua, it's almost like a hub or heart of, Māoridom. In the North Island. But down here into Waiponamu, similar, moving to Dunedin and Queenstown, not a lot of Māori people down here. Which probably made it a lot harder for the correct pronunciations to be normalised. Or how they approach integrating our tikanga, our reo, our kawa, into this area, or even into business. And like I spoke about before, it was working in that it was in my work life per se, which is where I felt really uncomfortable to bring my whole self, if you know what I mean. Knowing where I'd come from, knowing my my culture, my history, my ideal. But to then suppress that to fit in. With the business, it really didn't sit well with me for a very, very long time. But we're lucky that over the years, we've had legislation passed to support equality. We look at the LGBTQ community. Hope I got that right, Wano. We're talking about mispronunciations here. Far out. And then they having, the law passed so that they can be civil union here in New Zealand. So we've come a long, long way.
We have come a long way. New Zealand's a great country, but without being so just flat out critical as Taika Waititi. There's still racism here, let's be honest. But it's still a fantastic country, and we're in my experience, it's one of the more integrated countries that you'll find, especially with the Indigenous community. Now, speaking about unconscious biases, and now we've talked a lot about the Māori aspect, right? Have you experienced any unconscious bias towards other races?
Oh, no, never.
No. Our nest,
me.
Our nest is clean, isn't it?
Our whare is strong.
Yeah.
With no holes.
Yeah, so let's be honest, eh? You know, we're guilty of it too.
Of course, absolutely.
And do you want to throw out some examples there, bro?
Oh, well, you said it earlier when you said, being a fresh off the boat Māori, that derogatory term right there,
I can't believe I said that. Oh, no.
Unconscious bias, you say. But you said fresh off the boat Māori, but we all understand that term, how derogatory it is for a lot of our Pacific brothers and sisters out there.
Yeah.
Yep. And that was commonly used. My cousin that used to go to St. Pat's in Wellington.
Yep.
They used to use a lot of those derogatory terms for a lot of other cultures and races.
Yep.
And then we'd just pick those up ourselves, being young fellas, and
fewer ngā ingoa. Yep. So throw those names out, bro.
Oh, we might get some bloody hate mail coming to us or some death threats. So
we just talking our truth, eh?
Yeah, but that was definitely one. Our Indian brothers and sisters.
Yep.
A lot of derogatory terms, stereotypes.
Yep.
Coming about them.
So here's an interesting thing about stereotypes, because Indian is an example of that. Are all stereotypes negative, do you think?
Oh, I've never really had a good think about that.
Because one simple example of a stereotype is that all Indians know how to use a computer, right? That's an example of a stereotype that, I don't know, maybe. I guess it's negative just because you're putting a label on a person because of the perception of the whole race. Likewise with some of the Asian cultures, Chinese in particular, they're really hard workers and they work day and night. You'll notice, you might see shops. Their shops are open till midnight, and they'll have like 6-year-olds like doing the register and stuff. So they seem to have this natural intuition to just work all hours of the day and night. So, and then when you put the shoe on the other foot, Kiwis are like, "Nah, man, I don't do that. As soon as it's 5 o'clock, I'm clocking out and going home." Or no, I've got a concert to go to, or I've got the rugby to go to. These things that I guess the New Zealand lifestyle in particular is about trying to find a balance between work and enjoyment of life. But who's to say that people who want to work in their shops are not enjoying it? Just because it's not something you want to do until 10 o'clock at night, it doesn't mean that they don't want to do it. So how do you feel about, maybe, I don't know, would you call them positive? No, I guess they're not positive.
Yeah, I'm really struggling to try and think of positive stereotypes, to be honest. And maybe they could be positive to the person saying it.
Yeah, that's right.
Derogatory to
the person who receives it.
To receives it, right?
Yeah, I guess you're right. I guess any kind of stereotyping or bias is negative in every situation. Just like, I don't know, like Jewish people are rich, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
And even, in Australia, I haven't worked over there, but a lot of my Kiwi mates that move over there, they have their own stereotyping over there that, they say the Aussies don't work hard enough, so the Kiwis have to go over there and get all the jobs where, all my Aussie mates are like, wow, they're all scaffies and, tradies anyway, all you bloomin' Kiwis, and you just get drunk and cause fights, so...
Well, I lived that too, bro. So I worked in Rosebery and in Sydney for a few years, and I understand the stereotype that Aussies are lazy. like I know where that comes from, and it's not because they are lazy. It's because they understand their rights as employees. They understand that way better than New Zealanders do. They understand their tax. They know what they can claim through their tax. So I learned a whole bunch of all of this when I went over there, and I learned why I should not, how not to be taken advantage of by your employer, because they're savvy, man. They're savvy when it comes to getting good penal rates. When it comes to negotiating contracts, and a lot of Kiwis see that as lazy, and they're like, why don't you just do the job, man? You know, stop complaining about it. And so I kind of get where the perception comes from of that bias, and I fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. We had a rule, an HR rule, that if you travelled overseas for any kind of job, you would have to spend 2 weeks before you came back home again. Then the company had to fly you back home. And me being like, well, I just want to stay on the project, so I would say yes to staying away for longer than 2 weeks, much longer. Yeah, I would stay away for 10-week projects, 12-week projects, 3-month projects, and I would say, you know what, for the sake of the project, I'll stay overseas. And so, I was kind of I wasn't doing the right thing by all the employees, because they negotiated all these things to say the company has to fly you back after 2 weeks. So I burned out, which is no surprise, because my employer let me burn myself out.
Yeah. The
rules were in place for me to not be burned out, but I thought I was being a nice guy when really all I was doing was burning myself out. So, those rules are there for a reason.
Yeah.
And those stereotypes aren't fair. Yeah. So, anyway, bit of a soapbox rant there, bro.
And these are the days of our lives.
Yeah. But during my time in Australia, I'll tell you another funny story, I was really worried when I first went into the office, because I'm like, oh no, I'm a Kiwi going into an Australian office. And what I found out was that there's so many Kiwis, especially in Sydney, that there were heaps of Kiwis in our Sydney office. And so the person who got made fun of the most was the guy from Tasmania. So all the Kiwis and all the other Aussies, we just made fun of the Tasmanian guy. The old neck scar. He's got a scar on his neck from his other head being cut off, and, just stuff like that. And how many toes you got on that foot, bro?
Yeah, there's a bit of that down in Te Waiponamu in a couple of areas.
Yeah, so it was quite funny, because you expect to see some biases and you don't get them. Although I would get people come up to me, like Australians in my office would come up to me and they'd go, "Hey Corey, I've seen Once Were Warriors." And I'm like, what the fuck? So? I'm like, is that supposed to mean something to me? Man, I hate that movie. I've seen Once Were Warriors.
But is it because it was like one of our first real movies that come out in New Zealand? And then, because even all my English mates, all the Kiwi guys that would go over there be like, you got to watch this movie, this is what New Zealand's like. So, yeah, which it definitely isn't if you're watching from overseas there to iwi. But
yeah. Yeah, but no. So, have you worked with many other nationalities, bro? And have you ever noticed? Have you ever noticed any kind of conscious or unconscious biases that went on?
Yeah. Well, working down here in Queenstown, you're always working with a lot of, foreigners, people from overseas. The town's, full of a lot of people from the UK, South America, which makes for a real awesome, unique, diverse workplace, diverse area, which is part of the reason I love this area. But I do notice that a lot of the indigenous cultures out there, show a lot of their aroha and manaaki through kai and hospitality, actually.
Yep.
Yeah, a lot of them.
all the Asian cultures, I was so surprised how closely they aligned with Māori culture around food, around family.
Yep.
You know, when a Chinese lady has a baby, they would have like a grandmother who would just be full time looking after that the newborn and the mum, and doing all of her housework for her and just doing everything. And that's a cultural thing.
Yeah.
It's not like I want to. It's like it's tikanga for them.
Yeah.
So
it's just ingrained in what they do.
Yeah. And so I was shocked at how much familiarity the other Asian cultures are to Māori culture. Yeah. Family's huge. Food is huge. Yeah. And doing things together.
Yep.
Yeah, so these this ended on more of a happy note, bro, but you know, the whole casual racism thing and conscious and unconscious bias.
Yep.
It's something that Māori, I think, have all experienced in New Zealand. Speaking of my time overseas, it's probably the place where I experienced the least amount of casual racism.
Yep.
It's so weird that the most casual racism I experienced was in my own country.
Yeah. And I totally agree. You know, I haven't worked overseas, but you know, spent a lot of time traveling, you know, around Europe and America and stuff. And no, didn't experience any of it. You see through the media that even in America, you know, there's a lot of it around. But you know, I never really got any of that. A guy spoke to me in Mexican one time when I walked in the Adidas store, because we probably looked like them, and I was like, "Whoa, bro, I don't know what you're talking about here." And he's like, "Oh, sorry." But he obviously thought I was Mexican, and he was like, "Oh, it's one of my Mexicani brothers. I'll have a cordial with them."
Yeah.
But very similar, and it was actually an example I thought of, which was quite recent over Christmas. I was back home and I went into this liquor store. I'm not going to name it, and I went at the back to get me some drinks, and I spent a lot of time in the chiller there because I didn't know what I wanted. And at the back of the chiller there was another door open, so I sort of popped my head into the door because I thought, oh, this must be where all the specials are, or where the other beers are, because it was only a small chiller. And when I was in there, the store owner, and I was like, "Hey, what are you doing in there?" and gave me this real nasty look. And I was like, "Oh, sorry, I thought it was just where the alcohol was." And anyway, so I went and got me a 6-pack of raspberry cruisers.
Bro.
I was a little bit over beer.
Oh, do you need some milk with that saucer, bro?
They were quite delicious, actually. 7%ers. And when I went to pay for them, he just gave me this real dirty look, and I knew that, you know, he had immediately thought, because I rocked in there with my jandals, you know, ripped singlet and shorts, you know, he was tainting me with that brush.
Yeah.
You know, like, this guy's just a thief, and, you know, he's looking to get, you know, Swifty something off me. And like I said, that was just in Christmas, and it may have been a misunderstanding.
Oh, wow. Just in Christmas?
Yeah, Christmas gone. So it may have been a misunderstanding, but for me, I still felt like that. I'd still felt like, you know, he had consciously put me in that bucket, I suppose, or, you know, put me in that lane, which I didn't like. No. But I just brushed it off and was like, whatever. So
wow,
yeah.
You're a bigger man than me, man. I would have got fired up, because if it's a misunderstanding, I would have explained to him, like, there's nothing on that door that makes me think that I shouldn't go in there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Put a damn do not enter sign on it or something, because it just looks like another door to me.
And it was open.
Yeah.
It was open too, so.
So it's tough, man. Like, I think all Māori have stories like that.
Yep.
We used to get followed around Decca. You remember Decca, bro? Yeah, that's going back a bit, eh?
I've had that too. Yeah, followed around Decca. Yep.
Followed around department stores by the what do you call them?
Security.
Yeah, or the store detectives. You know, they're kind of like mufti looking. They don't look obviously like they don't look like security people, but you can tell they're detectives, and they're just looking at you everywhere you go.
Yeah.
So we used to get that a lot, and one of my mates back in Gizzy, he used to pretend to be stealing shit so he could, like, just to wind them up. So he'd pretend to put stuff under his jacket, and then he'd pretend to walk out of the store, and they go, get back here, and he'd go, what? And they'd try and pat him down, and they say they saw him steal something. Yeah.
I actually did that in New World once here. I didn't purposely do it, so I'd walked into New World, and I forgot to get I grabbed a basket instead of a trolley, and then I went to get a watermelon and a few other things, and I was like, this basket isn't going to hold it. So I went back out through those gates to get a trolley, and then a guy runs over and was like, hey, what are you doing? You can't do that. So I started running. And then I ran over to the trolleys and I grabbed the trolley, and then I walked back and I was like, I'm just grabbing the trolley. And he was like, what have you got in your pockets? And I was like, I've got my wallet and I have my phone. And then I just carried on walking. So, yeah. And I just couldn't be bothered walking all the way around the store to come through.
No, I get that.
But yeah, been shoulder tapped in Kmart when I was a young fella. Me and my mates were in there. We didn't steal anything. We were looking to go in there to buy some, might have been basketball cards. And then, the store detective just comes up, shoulder tapped me and my mate and was like, you guys have to come with me and you got to show us your guys' pockets. And we're like, what? What the hell's going on here? So we went into the room, we showed them, and then, they couldn't do anything and we left. And I was like, what was that all about?
Yeah. I'd like to think that today, if that ever happened to someone, you just pick up your phone and start recording it, and you put that shit on TikTok, and you hold these people accountable. If they're wrong, and if they've profiled you, and they're wrong, I think they deserve whatever shame's coming. Like they can call it a misunderstanding, or they can call it just doing their job. But I've had it happen to me enough times to know that I've been profiled. Christchurch, I was pulled over by the cops one time. I don't know why, because my car was warranted. I wasn't speeding, didn't do anything. Yeah, sure enough, they pulled me over and just said, random stop. And I'm cool with that. Like, I'm all right. Yeah, okay. That's fine so far. Then did the breathalyzer test. Yeah, that's fine so far. Then he did is this your girlfriend? And I'm like, what? Because my girlfriend was sitting next to me, and she's I generally speaking, nothing against wahine Māori, but I've had Pākehā girlfriends most of my life. So and I think he just sort of had a problem with me having a white girlfriend, and he asked if that was my girlfriend. I said yes, even though I should have said it's none of your business. And then he said, does this car belong to you? And then I'm like, okay, now I see what you're doing. Like you've looked at me. I think I might have been wearing a hoodie, I'm not sure. Straight away, he was scoping out whether there's a problem with the situation. It had nothing to do with a random stop. Now it escalated into something else. So I ended up just answering his questions, not being a jerk about it. But afterwards, I felt quite angry about how I was treated and, why I was asked those questions in particular. I didn't actually think about it at the time. It wasn't until my girlfriend said, I can't believe he asked you whether I was your girlfriend. Like, what the hell has that got to do with anything? And I was so used to that, I didn't really think much of it. But she said that no one would ever have asked me for that if a cop pulled me over. So then, through other people's experiences, I started to realise I was getting hard done by, and yet I was so used to getting stupid questions like that from the police. Yeah. We've gone over time now, so I don't know if you've got any sort of like summing up thoughts.
Yeah, obviously, we're a long way where we used to be, and as a society, as a people, not only in Aotearoa but around the world, you look at the Black Lives Matter movement that occurred last year, I believe, was that the year before, with many countries and people supporting that kaupapa. With legislative changes in a lot of countries, and also businesses getting on board to try and make it more normalised, especially for our culture here in Aotearoa, going out of their way to go through the appropriate channels to educate business leaders, educate workers, having resources and tools like the Ngā Manu.
Yeah, Ngā Manu.
Manu website, which is, a great tool for a lot of te wai pounamu businesses out there to reach into to further educate themselves.
Yeah.
We're in a really good space. We're heading in a really good direction to actually normalise or quash out a lot of that conscious or unconscious bias, to be honest.
Yeah.
And, within our lifetimes, we've seen, massive movements. And we've still got a long way to go.
Long way to go.
Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, long way to go.
But it all starts with, yourself, It all starts with, like Michael Jackson said, the man in the mirror. So,
yeah.
So small steps. So for those people out there that want to start supporting that kaupapa, learn your local place names.
Yep.
Reach out to people who can help you learn how to say them correctly.
Yep.
And, what are we taught when we're kids?
Don't put your finger in an electrical socket.
It's just gone out of my head now.
You set that up so well, bro.
Anyway, instead I'll just say, don't be mean to others. Regardless of the stereotyping, even though it is quite fun when you're having a few news and you're trying to throw it out. Yeah. What about yourself? You want to add to any of that kōrero?
No, I'm I think I've talked enough, bro. But the only tip I'd give is just do your best with Māori place names. Making an effort and trying to say it correctly from here is all we ask. Even if you're wrong, that's fine. If you meant well, and if you're open to being corrected, then ask if someone knows the correct words. It's if it's that easy to say camembert,
Sauvignon
Blanc, sorbet. If it's that easy to say those words that are not English, then we just want people to make an effort to pronounce our Māori words correctly. Yeah.
So give it a go, whānau. But unfortunately, that's all we've got time for. So, subscribe down the bottom. Hit us a like. Get in there. Hit us some comments whether you agree, you disagree. We didn't do much research on the subject. Maybe we need to get an expert or a subject matter expert in to, help us with this kaupapa. We're just, two Māori boys, that have an opinion.
Yeah.
That have a chew.
Chewing the fat on something we think we know something about.
And, we'll catch you next time. Mā te wā.
Mā te wā.